I never thought a mandatory first aid course would turn into the most awkward, confusing, and somehow kind of adorable day of my life. Seriously, I signed up for this at work because, well, the company needed certified first aiders, and I figured, why not get it over with? What I didn't expect was to be paired up with the most charming guy I had met in months, and to have him push the boundaries of partner practice so much that I almost forgot we were supposed to be learning CPR. So here's how it went down. The class was held in this bland conference room, the kind with those cheap folding chairs and a whiteboard that looked like it hadn't been wiped clean since the 90s. There were about 20 of us, all shuffled into pairs for the practical exercises, and that's when I met Ethan. Tall, with this easy smile that made the room feel a little less sterile, even when we were surrounded by mannequins and diagrams of choking hazards. Right away, Ethan gave me this look like he was sizing me up. Not in a creepy way, more like he was deciding if I was going to be worth his time. I wasn't sure if I was flattered or just nervous, because I'm usually the guy who blends into the background in these kinds of settings. But hey, he introduced himself, and for the next few hours we were stuck doing all the practice scenarios together. At first, it was just your typical press here, tilt the head there sort of thing. You know, the usual dry stuff that makes you wonder how you'd even remember it in a real emergency. But then, things started to get weird. Ethan's version of partner practice involved a lot more touching than I was expecting. Like, instead of just guiding my hands to the right positions on the dummy, he'd casually rest his hand on my shoulder or lean in a little too close when we were supposed to be checking the airway. I caught myself laughing nervously, not sure if I should say something or just roll with it. And honestly, part of me wanted to roll with it because despite the weirdness, Ethan had this warmth that made the whole experience less stressful. When I tried to correct his technique, he'd grin and say, "Relax, I've got this." But then he'd make these little jokes that only I seemed to catch. It was like the class wasn't just about first aid anymore. It was about us and some unspoken game we were suddenly playing. By the time we moved on to the choking rescue practice, I was thinking, okay, this is supposed to be serious, right? But Ethan used the opportunity to get ridiculously close, pretending to demonstrate the Heimlich maneuver on me, but his hands lingered longer than necessary. I swear my heart was doing backflips, and not because of the emergency scenarios. I kept wondering if anyone else noticed, or if I was just imagining things. At some point, I caught myself wondering why I was even here, if I was really focused on learning first aid, or just pretending to listen so I could sneak these little moments with Ethan. And then the instructor called time on the exercise, and suddenly it was like the spell broke. Ethan stepped back, smiled that grin of his, and said, "Same time tomorrow?" That's when I realized this wasn't going to be just a boring class. Something was definitely happening, and I couldn't tell if I was excited or terrified. Either way, I knew I was stuck with him for the rest of the course, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted it any other way. "Same time tomorrow?" I repeated, my voice a little breathier than I'd intended. He just laughed, that easy low laugh that made me feel like I was the only person in the room who mattered. Yeah. Ethan shrugged, like it was no big deal, but the way his eyes held mine told a different story. "You owe me a rematch with the Heimlich." Then he winked and packed up his stuff. I stood there for a moment, watching him leave, heart still doing those backflips. I couldn't believe how quickly this whole thing had gone from mandatory class to whatever this was. My head was spinning with a mix of excitement and, what the hell is happening? The next day, I showed up early, partly because I was nervous, mostly because I wanted to see if Ethan would be there first. He was, leaning against the wall near the entrance, scrolling on his phone, looking effortlessly cool in a way that made me immediately self-conscious about my slightly rumpled shirt and too tight jeans. "Hey," he said without looking up, but he smiled when he finally did. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, trying to sound casual, which, surprise, surprise, did not come off casual at all. We got paired up again, of course. This time, the instructor threw in some bandaging practice, and Ethan decided he was going to be the patient. He plopped down on the floor dramatically, groaning like he'd been stabbed in the leg, which got a few chuckles from the group. "All right, nurse," he said, grinning at me. "Time to take care of me. I kneeled down, feeling a little awkward as I wrapped the gauze around his calf. But then his hand brushed mine, and he held my gaze with this playful intensity that made my stomach twist in a way I really didn't expect. "Easy there," I joked, but my voice shook more than I wanted it to. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'm not fragile." There was this moment, just a brief pause between us, where everything else in that room, the mannequins, the instructor's voice, even the other students, faded away. I wanted to say something, but all I could do was keep wrapping the bandage and hope I didn't mess it up. For the rest of the class, Ethan kept finding reasons to be close. When we practiced checking for responsiveness, he'd brush his hand against mine accidentally, or lean in just a little too close to whisper instructions. And I was caught somewhere between flattered and completely embarrassed. After the session ended, I found myself walking out the door with him, neither of us really ready to call it a day. "Want to grab a coffee?" he asked, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I hesitated for exactly 1 second before saying yes. We went to this little cafe around the corner. The place was cozy, with old jazz playing softly in the background. We sat close, and for the first time I got a real look at him outside of the sterile classroom environment. Ethan was easy to talk to. He told me about his job as a graphic designer, how he'd moved to the city a couple of years ago, and that his favorite way to spend a Sunday was hiking with his dog. I shared some stuff about myself, things I usually kept to myself at work, and it felt natural, like we'd known each other far longer than 2 days. At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Look, I know this is probably weird," he said, voice low and a little nervous, "but I don't want this to be just about the class. I like you. Like, more than just as a first aid partner." My heart nearly stopped. I squeezed his hand back, surprised at how easy it felt to do. "I like you too," I admitted. He smiled, this genuine, warm smile that made my chest feel tight. We sat there, holding hands for a while, not needing to say anything else. The rest of the week went by in a blur. Every class felt less like a chore and more like an excuse to be near him. The awkward touches turned into intentional ones, and the teasing got more personal. We started texting after class, sharing memes, talking about music, and making plans to hang out outside of the course. But there was one thing I was still nervous about. What would happen when the course ended? Would this just be a fun crush that fizzled out? Or something real? On the last day, when we had to do a full emergency scenario together, I was determined to focus. But halfway through, Ethan whispered, "Don't worry, I've got your back," and caught my hand in his. I looked at him and saw everything I hadn't been brave enough to say yet. Maybe first aid wasn't just about saving lives. Maybe it was about taking risks. And maybe, just maybe, Ethan was the reason I was finally ready to do that. After the final class wrapped up, there was this strange mix of relief and disappointment hanging in the air. On one hand, I was glad to have the first aid certification under my belt, something practical and useful, you know? But on the other, I couldn't shake the feeling that the best part of the whole experience was now over. No more excuses to see Ethan twice a week, no more those stolen moments when it felt like the world narrowed down to just the two of us and some plastic mannequins. We lingered a bit after the last session, neither of us wanting to be the first to say goodbye. The classroom was quiet. Most people had already scattered to catch their buses or flights or whatever they had waiting outside these 4 walls. So Ethan said, breaking the silence with that familiar grin, "Now what? Are we supposed to just pretend we don't know each other?" I laughed, but there was a little nervousness under that. "I was hoping you'd say something like, 'Let's not make this the end.'" He raised an eyebrow, mock offended. "You're not bad at this first aid stuff, but your line delivery needs work." "Hey, I'm better with actions than words." He dropped his guard for a second and took my hand again. "Perfect. Because I'm looking forward to seeing what your actions say." That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the nervous energy of a new crush. It was something deeper, a feeling that I was on the edge of something real. I kept replaying our last few days, the touches, the jokes, the way his eyes looked when he thought no one was watching. I knew I wanted to see him again. Not because of the class, but because I genuinely liked him. The next morning, I sent a quick text. "Coffee? My treat. His reply was almost instant. Already there. Don't make me wait. We met up at the same cafe, and it felt less nervous this time, more like catching up with an old friend. We talked about everything and nothing. Music, movies, a ridiculous game we played growing up. And every minute was easy, like the kind of connection you hope for but rarely find. A few weeks passed, and we slipped into a routine. Weekend hikes, late-night takeout, and yes, plenty of laughs over the absurdity of us meeting in a first aid class. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when I caught myself overthinking every word or gesture, but mostly it was just comfortable. Saved out one evening, after a long hike, we sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and pink. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter around me, and I rested my head on his shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about how random this all is. You and me, meeting because we had to learn how to save lives. It's kind of poetic, don't you think?" I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. "Yeah, like we saved each other in some way." He turned to look at me, eyes soft. "Exactly." There was a pause, the kind that feels full of everything words can't capture. Then Ethan reached out, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. It was tender, deliberate, a promise without saying anything. I leaned into the touch, feeling a surge of something new and powerful. It wasn't just infatuation anymore. It was the start of something real. But with that came the inevitable question: how far could this go? We hadn't exactly talked about what we were or what we wanted. And while it felt natural to be with him, I couldn't ignore the little voice in my head, asking if I was ready for whatever that meant. One night, a couple of weeks after we'd started officially seeing each other, Ethan invited me to his apartment. It was cozy, filled with plants and art books, and the scent of fresh coffee. Just like him, warm and inviting. We cooked dinner together, trying to follow a recipe neither of us really knew. The kitchen was a mess, laughter spilling over every little mistake. Afterward, we moved to the couch, the city lights twinkling outside the window. He looked at me then, serious for the first time in a while. "I want to be honest with you. I haven't always been the best at relationships. I've gotten hurt before, and sometimes I get scared." I nodded, feeling my own walls creep up. "Me too." He took my hand, squeezing it gently. "But I want to try. With you. No games, no running. Just us." I swallowed hard, heart pounding. I want that too. And in that moment, everything felt possible. The past, the fears, they didn't disappear, but they were smaller, quieter, because we had each other. Of course, things weren't perfect. There were awkward conversations, moments when I worried I was moving too fast or not fast enough. There were days when the weight of everything outside our bubble pressed in, reminding me that real life wasn't as simple as a first aid class. But through it all, Ethan was there, steady, kind, surprising me every day. Looking back, I realized that first aid course wasn't just about learning how to help someone in an emergency. It was about opening myself up, taking a chance, and finding someone who made me want to be brave. And honestly, I'm glad he took it too far, because if he hadn't, I might never have found the kind of connection that makes you believe in second chances. Things between Ethan and me settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and thrilling. Every text, every shared meal, every quiet moment felt like we were building something real, brick by brick. But, as with all things worth having, it wasn't without its bumps. One Saturday morning, we decided to check out this new art exhibit downtown. Ethan had been excited about it for weeks, and honestly, I was just happy to spend the day with him. The gallery was bright and echoey, filled with abstract paintings and installations that neither of us pretended to fully understand. We wandered through, occasionally pausing to argue playfully about what existential angst might look like in paint. At one point, I caught Ethan standing close to a large canvas, his eyes tracing the chaotic strokes. He was quiet, more serious than usual. "What's on your mind?" I asked, stepping beside him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. Sometimes I think about how fast things have moved between us. I mean, I want this, us, but I also worry. Like, am I moving too fast? Am I just scared of being alone and convincing myself this is the answer? I nodded slowly. I get that. I've been there too. It's scary to open up, especially when you've been hurt before. But I don't feel like I'm just patching a hole in my life with you. I want to build something. He turned to me, eyes searching. You mean it? Yeah, I said, reaching out and taking his hand. I want to try, even if it's messy, even if we don't have all the answers. The relief in his smile was palpable, and for the first time that day, I felt like the weight in his chest had lifted a little. After the gallery, we grabbed coffee and found a bench in the park. The sun was warm, and the world felt a little softer. We talked about the future, careers, dreams, places we wanted to visit. For once, it wasn't about what we feared, but what we hoped for. But life, as always, had its own plans. That night, I got a call from work. Something urgent had come up. I had to fly out the next day for a week-long project. I tried to hide my disappointment, but Ethan noticed immediately. You're gonna kill me if this messes things up, I joked half-heartedly. He shook his head, squeezing my hand. No way. We'll make it work. A week isn't forever. Still, the thought of being apart after just starting to find our footing was tough. We promised to text constantly and have video calls whenever possible. I could tell he was trying to stay positive, but I knew the silence between calls would be loud. The first day apart was surreal. I missed the small things. The way he laughed at my terrible jokes, the way his hand fit perfectly in mine. Work was exhausting, and I found myself staring at my phone more times than I cared to admit, hoping for a message. Then came the video call. Seeing his face lit up my screen was like a jolt of electricity. We talked about everything and nothing, making plans for when I got back, trying to keep the connection alive despite the miles. But as the days dragged on, the cracks started to show. Our conversations grew shorter, the pauses lingered longer. I caught myself overthinking every text, wondering if I'd said something wrong or if he was pulling away. On the fifth night, I finally had to ask, Hey, is everything okay? You seem distant. There was a long silence before he answered. I'm sorry, it's just, I miss you, and it's hard. Me too, I admitted. Maybe we're rushing this, trying to keep it all together when we're apart. He nodded, even though I couldn't see him. Maybe, but I don't want to lose what we have. Neither do I. We decided to take a step back, focus on ourselves while keeping the door open for each other. It was painful, but necessary. Sometimes love isn't about constant contact. It's about trusting that the connection will survive the distance. When I finally returned, exhaustion hit me like a freight train. But the moment I saw Ethan waiting for me at the airport, all the frustration and loneliness melted away. We fell into each other's arms, holding on like we'd never let go. That night, over takeout in his apartment, we talked for hours about fears, about what we meant to each other, about how to navigate the messiness of real life together. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was honest. A few weeks later, we took our first trip together, a weekend getaway to a cabin in the woods. No distractions, just us and the quiet. We hiked, cooked, read, and spent long evenings talking by the fire. It felt like a reset, a chance to breathe and just be. One night, under a blanket of stars, Ethan reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. You saved me, he whispered. I smiled, heart full. No, we saved each other. That's what this was. Two people, a little broken, a little scared, choosing to be brave. Choosing to take the risk. And somewhere between awkward first aid drills and late-night conversations, we found something worth fighting for. Even with all the progress we'd made, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface of our relationship. Something neither of us wanted to name out loud. After the cabin trip, things felt lighter, more genuine. But real life has a way of creeping in, no matter how good the weekends are. A month after we got back, Ethan invited me over one evening. I was expecting the usual cozy hangout, maybe some wine and a movie. Instead, when I arrived, his apartment was unusually tidy, the kind of spotless that feels more like preparation than just cleaning. He greeted me with that familiar smile, but there was a nervous edge to it I hadn't seen before. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down. "What's up?" He gestured toward the couch. "Sit down. I want to talk." My stomach tightened. This wasn't like him. Usually, he'd find a way to joke or deflect when something serious was on his mind. "Okay," I said, bracing myself. "I'm all ears." Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been offered a job. In another city. It's a great opportunity, one I can't really pass up." I blinked, the words hitting me like a slap. "Wow. That's big." "Yeah." He ran his hands through his hair. "The thing is, I don't want to lose what we have, but it's complicated. I don't know how to do long distance again, not after what we went through." I sat there, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to say, "Let's figure this out." Another part was screaming, "This could all fall apart." "Have you decided?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "No. I wanted to talk to you first." We spent the rest of the evening hashing it out. Pros and cons, fears and hopes. We both admitted how scared we were of losing each other, but also of holding ourselves back. In the end, we agreed on something neither of us expected. We'd give long distance a real shot. Not because it was easy, but because what we had felt worth fighting for. The next few weeks were a roller coaster. Our daily texts and calls became lifelines, but they also highlighted the gaps, the missed hugs, the quiet silences that no amount of messages could fill. I found myself counting down the days until I could see him again, feeling both excited and anxious. One night, after a particularly tough day at work, I called Ethan, my voice wavering. "I'm sorry I'm not better at this," I confessed. "I hate feeling so far away." He paused, then said, "Me too. But every time I think about us, about what we've built, it reminds me why I'm doing this." That simple honesty meant more than I can say. It made the distance feel a little smaller. Months passed, and we learned to adapt. Video dates, surprise visits, sending each other little care packages. It wasn't perfect. There were misunderstandings and moments of doubt, but through it all, we kept coming back to each other. Then, one rainy Saturday, Ethan showed up at my door unannounced, soaked but smiling like he'd just won the lottery. "I couldn't wait," he said breathlessly. We spent the day curled up on the couch, the storm outside matching the tumult inside me, the mix of relief, love, and the terrifying possibility of what this could mean. As the evening settled in, Ethan looked at me with that quiet determination I'd come to love. "I don't want to live. What if I moved back? What if this could be our fresh start?" I reached for his hand, feeling my heart race. "I want that too." That night, as we lay tangled together, I realized that love isn't about perfect timing or perfect circumstances. It's about taking the messy, complicated parts and choosing each other anyway. Ethan and I aren't perfect. We're still learning, still figuring things out. But what we have is real. It's messy, it's beautiful, and it's ours. And honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way. So Ethan moved back. It wasn't as simple as packing a bag and hopping on a train, of course. There were goodbyes and paperwork and that heavy, weird feeling of uprooting a life you've built. But when he finally showed up at my place with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and that familiar grin on his face, everything just felt right. Like we'd passed some invisible checkpoint and were finally on the same page, in the same chapter. That night we didn't say much. We just stood in the doorway, holding each other up after months of distance and uncertainty. It was quiet, but it was full, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. The days that followed were a blur of apartment hunting, late-night unpacking, and figuring out how to merge two lives that had been separated for too long. It wasn't all smooth sailing. We argued about little things. A misplaced coffee mug, whose turn it was to do the dishes, what shade of blue the living room walls should be. But even in the messy stuff, there was something grounding about having him there. There was this one morning that sticks out. I woke up to find Ethan standing in the kitchen, making coffee with a focused expression I'd never seen on him before. He looked up when I stumbled out of the bedroom, bleary-eyed and not quite ready to face the day. "Morning," he said softly, handing me a mug. "I made it just how you like it." I smiled, taking the cup. Thanks. That's thoughtful. He shrugged like it was nothing, but his eyes held something warmer. We're in this together now. I want to get the little things right. That simple gesture, that little moment of care, made me realize how much we'd both grown. We weren't just two people thrown together by chance anymore. We were partners in the truest sense. But of course, life threw us a curveball. About 2 months after Ethan settled in, I got a call from HR at work. There was going to be a big restructuring, and my position was on the chopping block. Suddenly, everything felt unstable again. I didn't want to burden Ethan with the news right away. I kept it to myself, trying to figure out what to do. But it was hard to hide the stress creeping into my days, the way I'd sit staring at my computer, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. One evening, after a particularly rough day, I came home and found Ethan waiting for me in the living room, a quiet concern in his eyes. "Talk to me," he said gently. I sighed, spilling everything. My fears, the uncertainty, the feeling of failure. He listened without interrupting, holding my hand like he was anchoring me. When I finished, Ethan pulled me close. "We'll get through this together." His confidence in us was the lifeline I needed. Over the next few weeks, we brainstormed, updated my resume, and started looking at new opportunities. Ethan even helped me prepare for interviews, playing the role of the tough but encouraging friend. It wasn't easy. Rejection emails piled up, and there were nights when I questioned if I was making any progress at all. But through it all, Ethan was steady, reminding me of my strengths, making me laugh when I needed it most. One night, after a long day of job hunting, I sat on the couch feeling defeated. Ethan joined me, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. "All right, so maybe the corporate world isn't ready for your brilliance," he teased. "But you know what? You're more than a job title." I laughed despite myself. "Thanks for the pep talk, coach." He leaned in and kissed me softly. Always. Then, out of nowhere, he pulled out a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked, curious. He grinned. "Just a little something to remind you that I believe in you." Inside was a handwritten note that said, "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you. We're in this together." I felt my throat tighten. It was the kind of simple, honest thing that made all the uncertainty feel a little less scary. Not long after, I landed an interview at a small startup. Nothing glamorous, but a start. The night before, Ethan stayed up with me, helping me prep answers and calm my nerves. When the call came, I felt ready like never before. A week later, I got the offer. We celebrated in our tiny kitchen, clinking glasses of whatever was left in the fridge. Ethan toasted to new beginnings, and to us, and I realized that this, us, was the greatest adventure I'd ever signed up for. Through all the unexpected twists, from an awkward first aid class to moving in together, from job loss to new opportunities, we'd found a way to keep going. Not because it was easy, but because we chose each other every day. And honestly, if someone had told me back then, sitting awkwardly next to Ethan at that first class, that this is where we'd end up, I probably would have laughed. But now, I wouldn't change a single moment. Love, I've learned, is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright terrifying. But with the right person by your side, it's also the most beautiful thing in the world. Months after settling into the new job, life found a comfortable rhythm. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when the old anxieties bubbled up, or when we disagreed over something trivial. But those moments were quieter now, and we had a better way to handle them. We'd learned to listen, to be patient, and most importantly, to lean on each other. One evening, after a slow Sunday spent cooking and binge-watching shows, Ethan and I found ourselves sitting on the small balcony of our apartment. The city lights flickered below, and a soft breeze carried the smell of rain. He turned to me, smiling softly. "Remember that first day in the first aid class? When I almost took it too far?" I laughed, the memory warm and vivid. "How could I forget? You definitely kept me on my toes." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "I'm glad I did." I smiled back, feeling the steady beat of my heart. "Me too. I never imagined that a random class would lead to this." "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet but sure. "To us." We sat like that for a while, just taking it in, the way the light danced in his eyes, the comfortable silence between us, the sense that, despite everything, we'd found something real. It struck me then how far we'd come. From awkward glances and hesitant touches during practice drills, to this, sharing a life, facing fears together, building something neither of us expected but both wanted. There wasn't a grand gesture, no dramatic confession. Just two people who chose each other every day, in the little moments that truly matter. And that, I realized, was enough. Because sometimes love isn't about fireworks or perfect timing. It's about showing up, quietly and sincerely, even when it's hard. It's about holding on through uncertainty and growing together. As Ethan's hand found mine, warm and steady, I felt a deep calm settle in my chest. This was home. This was the kind of love that saves you, not from danger or disaster, but from loneliness and doubt. And in that quiet moment, beneath the city lights, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be.